Sudan, a nation scarred by decades of internal strife, finds itself grappling with yet another devastating conflict. The roots of this latest crisis run deep, entangled in a complex web of political rivalries, ethnic tensions, and a struggle for power. At the heart of the conflict lie two powerful military factions: the Sudanese Armed Forces, or SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, known as RSF. The SAF, the official military of Sudan, is led by General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. Al-Burhan came to prominence during the transitional period following the ousting of longtime dictator Omar al-Bashir. He positioned himself as a leader committed to democratic reforms and civilian rule, a stance that initially garnered him both domestic and international support. On the other side of the divide stands the RSF, a paramilitary force with a controversial history. The RSF, under the command of General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti, rose to prominence during the Darfur conflict. Accused of widespread human rights abuses, the RSF nevertheless gained significant power and influence within Sudan's security apparatus. The seeds of the current conflict were sown in the aftermath of al-Bashir's removal. The power-sharing agreement, designed to shepherd Sudan towards democracy, proved fragile. The SAF and RSF, once united in their opposition to al-Bashir, found themselves increasingly at odds. Their rivalry, fueled by a thirst for power and control over Sudan's vast resources, set the stage for a disastrous confrontation. The fragile peace after Omar al-Bashir's ousting was short-lived. Tensions between the SAF and RSF erupted into warfare on April 15, 2023. Skirmishes in Khartoum escalated into a nationwide conflict. Heavy gunfire and explosions rocked the capital. Civilian casualties mounted as residents were caught in the crossfire. August 2023. The violence peaked. Khartoum became the epicenter of indiscriminate shelling and airstrikes. Hospitals and residential areas were hit, increasing civilian casualties. Over 1 million people fled Sudan seeking refuge. January 2024. The conflict entered its 10th month. Fighting spread to Gezira and Darfur. The humanitarian situation deteriorated rapidly. September 26, 2024. The SAF launched a major offensive. The assault resulted in significant civilian casualties and infrastructure destruction. The international community condemned the violence but seemed powerless to stop it. Khartoum, once a bustling center of commerce and culture, has become a ghost town. Its streets eerily deserted save for the movement of armed men and the wreckage of war. The city, caught in a deadly crossfire between the SAF and the RSF, has borne the brunt of the conflict, its once vibrant neighborhoods now scarred by bullet holes and littered with debris. The fighting has transformed Khartoum into a battleground, with both sides entrenched in urban warfare. Residential areas, once sanctuaries for families, have become targets, their streets transformed into no-man's lands. Hospitals, struggling to cope with the influx of casualties, have themselves come under attack, their ability to provide life-saving care severely compromised. The city's infrastructure, already strained by years of neglect, has crumbled under the relentless onslaught. Power outages are commonplace, plunging homes and businesses into darkness. Water supplies have been disrupted, forcing residents to queue for hours for a precious few liters. The once familiar rhythms of life have been shattered, replaced by the constant fear of the next shell or airstrike. While Khartoum remains the epicenter of the conflict, the violence has cast a long shadow over other parts of Sudan, particularly the agricultural heartland of Gezira State and the long-troubled region of Darfur. These areas, already grappling with their own unique challenges, have been drawn into the vortex of fighting, their fragile stability shattered by the resurgence of violence. Gezira State, known as Sudan's breadbasket, has witnessed a surge in fighting, disrupting agricultural production and exacerbating the country's food crisis. Farmers have been forced to flee their fields, leaving crops unattended and harvests to rot. Irrigation systems, vital for agriculture in this arid region, have been damaged, further jeopardizing food security. Darfur, still haunted by the ghosts of its own devastating conflict, has seen a resurgence of violence, with reports of ethnic cleansing and mass atrocities. The RSF, accused of perpetrating some of the worst atrocities during the Darfur conflict, has been implicated in attacks on civilians, particularly those from communities perceived as supporting the SAF. The cycle of violence, seemingly unending, threatens to plunge Darfur back into the abyss of humanitarian catastrophe. Section 5. A generation uprooted, the devastating toll of displacement. The human cost of Sudan's conflict is staggering, measured in the millions of lives uprooted, families torn apart, and futures left hanging in the balance. The violence has triggered one of the world's largest displacement crises, with over 14 million people, almost a third of the population, forced to flee their homes. Within Sudan, over 11 million people have been internally displaced, seeking refuge in safer parts of the country. They crowd into makeshift camps, schools, and mosques, often living in cramped and unsanitary conditions. Many have fled with only the clothes on their backs, their belongings left behind in the chaos of escape. Outside Sudan's borders, over 3 million refugees have sought refuge in neighboring countries, placing a tremendous strain on the resources of host communities. Chad, already grappling with its own internal challenges, hosts the largest number of refugees, followed by South Sudan and Egypt. These countries, struggling to provide for their own citizens, face an uphill battle in meeting the needs of the influx of refugees. Section 6. The face of despair, hunger, disease, and the crumbling healthcare system. The conflict in Sudan has not only unleashed a wave of violence, but has also triggered a humanitarian crisis of catastrophic proportions. The fighting, coupled with economic collapse and the breakdown of essential services, has left millions of Sudanese teetering on the brink of survival, their lives hanging by a thread. Hunger stalks the land, its grip tightening with each passing day. The conflict has disrupted agricultural production, destroyed livelihoods, and severed supply chains, leaving millions facing acute food insecurity. The World Food Programme warns that over 15 million people in Sudan, more than a third of the population, are food insecure, with many facing emergency levels of hunger. Disease, a constant companion to conflict, has taken hold, its spread exacerbated by the collapse of the healthcare system. Hospitals and clinics already lacking essential medicines and equipment have been damaged or destroyed in the fighting. Health workers, facing threats to their own safety, have been forced to flee, leaving a void in healthcare provision. Section 7. The world's forgotten crisis. A plea for international attention. The conflict in Sudan, despite its devastating consequences, risks becoming a forgotten crisis, overshadowed by other global emergencies. The world's attention, often fickle and fleeting, has moved on, leaving the people of Sudan to grapple with the consequences of a conflict largely ignored by the international community. The lack of international attention is reflected in the woefully inadequate humanitarian response. Funding appeals have fallen short of their targets, leaving aid agencies struggling to provide even basic necessities to those in desperate need. The humanitarian crisis in Sudan, one of the worst in the world, is unfolding amidst a backdrop of global indifference. The international community has a moral imperative to act, to break its silence and mobilize the resources and political will needed to alleviate the suffering in Sudan. The people of Sudan, caught in the crossfire of a conflict not of their making, deserve the world's attention and support. Their lives, their futures, depend on it. Section 8. Fueling the flames. The peril of external support. The conflict in Sudan is not an isolated affair, confined within the country's borders. External actors, driven by their own strategic interests and regional ambitions, have fueled the flames of war, providing arms, funding, and logistical support to the warring parties. This external involvement, far from contributing to a resolution of the conflict, has only served to prolong the fighting and exacerbate the humanitarian crisis. Regional powers vying for influence in the Horn of Africa have used the conflict in Sudan as a proxy war, supporting their respective allies with arms and funding. This influx of weapons has fueled the violence, making the conflict more deadly and intractable. Moreover, the involvement of external actors has complicated efforts to mediate a ceasefire and find a negotiated settlement. The international community must send a clear message that external interference in Sudan's internal affairs will not be tolerated. Sanctions should be imposed on individuals and entities found to be providing material support to the warring parties. Diplomatic efforts should focus on persuading regional powers to use their influence to bring about a ceasefire and support a Sudanese-led peace process. Section 9. A call to action, the imperative for peace and reconciliation in Sudan. The ongoing conflict in Sudan is a tragedy of immense proportions. The fighting has shattered lives and destroyed communities. The international community has a moral obligation to support peace and reconciliation. The first priority is to secure a ceasefire and create space for dialogue. The UN must act decisively, imposing an arms embargo and sanctions. Regional actors must press for an end to the fighting. A ceasefire is only the first step on a long road to peace. Addressing the root causes of the conflict requires a comprehensive peace process. The international community must support a Sudanese-led peace process. The people of Sudan deserve our unwavering commitment to peace. We must not allow Sudan to become another forgotten crisis. The time for action is now.